this is the right fight, that we are fighting for something right, and people in the world understand that and they support us. Especially when you talk about Cuba. Vietnamese people, we don't consider Cuba just our friends. We consider Cuba our blood brother. Because like Cuba was the very first country in the world who officially set a relationship with Vietnam when we gained independence.
Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Ramiro with Anticonquista. Anticonquista is an anti-imperialist media collective. Our content is produced by and for the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora. And today we have the honor of being joined by Luna Oy. Luna is a YouTuber based in Hanoi, Vietnam, who creates content about Vietnam and Vietnamese socialism. And today I wanted to speak with Luna about Vietnam, socialism, and what lessons us as Latin American and Caribbean communists, what lessons we can learn from the history of Vietnam in terms of not only overthrowing capitalism and imperialism, but also building constructive socialism, serving the people, building up its infrastructure. And there's so much to learn from Vietnam and so much historical solidarity that goes way back into the 60s and the 70s, connections between Ho Chi Minh and other revolutionaries in Latin America. And so, Luna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Luna, and my channel is Luna Oy. So nice to meet you and talk to you all today.
So, Luna, tell me a little bit about Vietnam. First of all, where are you based in Vietnam right now? And what are your thoughts on the Vietnamese political system? Obviously, it's the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. It's a worker state, a country, a nation that's run by the working class people who are serving the economy, serving those who are most exploited. Not perfect like any society, but definitely a lot better than a lot of Latin American countries. What is your view on where Vietnam is at the moment, and how do you feel about the socialist system in your country?
Yeah, I've been living in Hanoi for 10 years, and now I just moved to Da Nang, the city in the central Vietnam, for just a few months. And my view about the political system in Vietnam is like Vietnam now, I can see like it's the mixture of socialism and capitalism. It was because in the 90s, as I talk in my East Vietnam Socialist video, we had to build like a socialist society. And that was why now Vietnam is the mixture of capitalism and socialism. So like there are a lot of problems in Vietnam, such as like the biggest one is corruption. It's very terrible. So like for the last 10 years, we've been like putting ministers and then CEOs, all kind of governors in prison because they were so corrupted. And yes, in the police too, our police also corrupted. But also at the same time, I also can see like there are also a lot of socialist program in Vietnam, such as we have like we have rice price stabilization, or medicine or gasoline. So it means like we will try to stabilize the price of important stuff such as medicine, rice, to protect the both farmers and consumer. And then like it literally means like take the money of the capitalist companies and help the farmers and the consumers. And this is the other thing is that like we have an anti-imperialist program who we like if, for example, for big international corporations, if they want to go into Vietnam marketplace, they have to follow our rule and play with our rule. So like, we use that to protect our domestic small business. Another thing is that like, especially in this pandemic, when the virus started and then we got the virus, the first patient, like there's no need to argue about that. All the treatment, all the testing, all the food immediately free. As you know,
Wow.
even no argue about that, no argument, just automatically free for everybody. And that's very helpful. And another like sign of socialism in Vietnam now is that like we have until now we have over 25,000 cooperatives in Vietnam. They are agricultural cooperatives, industrial, small scale industry cooperatives, and transportation cooperatives. And in agricultural cooperatives only, we have over 6 million members. So socialism in Vietnam is still really strong. And our Communist Party announced an exact plan that until 2050, we will be socialist enough to strive toward communism. So we have
That's
a clear
excellent.
plan for that. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And I know Vietnam has had such a tremendous success in battling COVID-19. From last time I checked, correct me if I'm wrong, there were 0 deaths, or I think 1 death. Um, and considering that it borders China, where where it the outbreak started, that's a really big accomplishment, especially as a country with hundreds of years of history of colonialism and imperialism. People forget that because going into like the topic that I want to really focus on today, which is lessons for Latin America, Vietnamese socialism. Latin America and Vietnam have a lot of similarities. We, as regions, the Latin American people were colonized. In our case, it was the Spanish and the Portuguese. In Vietnam, it was the French. And we also,
Oh, yeah. And then America.
and exactly, and then the United States, the biggest empire and the world empire right now. And in Latin America, we also have overcome feudalism, the system of feudalism, a backward system that it forces women to marry men that they don't want to, that is based on local agriculture that's not sustainable. And Vietnam has been able to not only defeat French colonialism and US imperialism, but it is also able to build socialism and have a plan. And in Latin America, I mean, we have a few examples of that, like Cuba, for example, the island of Cuba. In 1959, there was the Cuban Revolution led by Fidel Castro, Ernesto Che Guevara, and other Cuban communists who were able to build socialism in Cuba. We have also the Sandinista Revolution in Nicaragua, in Venezuela, the Bolivarian Revolution. And there's been a lot of other militant movements across Latin America, but we haven't been as successful as, let's say, Vietnam in being able to build a long lasting sort of revolution besides the example of Cuba. And so I wanted to ask you to walk us through what was Vietnam like before the Vietnamese Revolution? What was it like under French colonialism, under US imperialism? And like, what were the conditions that laid the ground for how Vietnam is today?
Okay. So go back to until the French came to Vietnam in 1858, if I'm correct. No, 1858, when we were still like there was still king in Vietnam. So like back then we was like totally 100% agricultural economic country, all totally based on agriculture. And then the France came. Actually, the main reason why France came to Vietnam is that like we had a highland in the south of Vietnam that perfect for rubber trees. They just came for rubber trees and black peppers, and that's it. So like they came to like Vietnam and then took over Vietnam, and then they enslaved millions of us. They enslaved millions of us and forced we to work and died in the rubber tree farm. Is horrible. The way the French imperialism and colonialism works out, like they take everything from that country and bring to their mother country and brought it to France. So like they left us nothing. We starved to death, and then they destroyed all of our farms like rice, and they took everything, and they built mansions and villas here to enjoy while they enslaved millions of us. It's really horrible. And the problem is that like back then Vietnamese people, we were so poor, and a lot of us like 80, 70, 80% of us like didn't know how to read and write. So we didn't have any knowledge and an ideology We just like did whatever they told us to do. That's the situation in Vietnam under the French colonialism. The situation of Vietnam under USA and under the USA colonialism is like what I think. We were so also like still freaking poor because in 1945, when like France just left, immediately Japanese fascists came and took over Vietnam. So like, it was the mixture. At that time in 1945, there were French soldiers and then fascist Japanese soldiers and then again USA soldiers also in Vietnam like that. It's really horrible. So like the 1945 was the years that like we had the worst famine ever. Millions of us died and had nothing because Japan at that time was so desperate because they were so losing the war in the World War II, right? So like they took everything they can too. Again, like took everything they can, rice, the foods, all kind of natural stuff. So we were left like again desperate. And then Ho Chi Minh came and he gave us an ideology, and that's very important. He gave us the ideas about socialism and communism, and that was the thing that helped Vietnam. Like finally, we had something to believe in, to believe in and to live on, because we were so desperate. And then that was the thing. Like that's the weak point of Vietnam. We were so poor. We didn't have enough rice to eat. Of course, we didn't have any weapons, and a lot of us didn't know how to read and write. But it's also the strong point when it means like the hatred of us toward colonialism and imperialism was so strong, and we'll rather to fight until our last breath to free our country for our own freedom. So like actually Ho Chi Minh turned the weaknesses into a strong point because of that. But like it was a hard time too because like a lot of them didn't know how to read and write, so the only way to communicate with them was through like speaking like this. And then in the war with America, with the USA, they bomb us to Stone Age, as I said so many times in my videos in my channel. They bomb us to Stone Age. Like the total bombs that the USA used in Vietnam in 20 years is like 3 times higher than the bombs they used in World War II in the whole Europe. Vietnam is just teeny tiny country, just like teeny tiny, and then we got bombed 3 times higher than the whole Europe in World War II. It is horrible. And then moreover, they even like spray toxic, 80 million liters of toxic all over Vietnam to like destroy our forests and all of our crops. So like to bring us to kill us all and starve us to death. And then until now, 45 years after the war, we still have like children born with disability and mental illness because of Agent Orange in those toxic. It is horrible. And we were desperate. We were poor, and it's like at that time it seemed like impossible. It seemed like it was impossible for us to gain freedom, to fight against the USA. But we still did it because if we didn't do it, we all just die. It's like we rather fight until we die than let them kill us. So it's something like that, and it's rough, and it's really rough.
That's beautiful. I mean, the story of Vietnam reminds me of David and Goliath. If you've ever heard that comparison, you have the Goliath of like, not only do you have French colonialism, Japanese imperialism, and U.S. imperialism, and the U.S. bombed the shit out of Vietnam, and they were still able to win. That's just so impressive, and that's why, as someone from Latin America and the Caribbean, like my family's from Honduras. Honduras in Central America is a small country as well. That has been pillaged and looted by the United States for so long. In my country, in Honduras, the nickname is Banana Republic because that's where the U.S. extracted a lot of bananas from during the 18 and 1900s. And so in Latin America, you have a similar situation. The way you were describing French colonialism in Vietnam is very similar to a Spanish colonization of Latin America. you have the conquistadores, and that's why our name is anti-conquista, because we're against conquest, and whether it's Spanish conquest or U.S. And so you have the conquistadores who went into indigenous lands in Latin America and the Caribbean and killed them, violated them, exploited them, used their resources the same way that they took rubber from Vietnam. They extracted gold, silver, coffee, sugar, bananas from our people, brought it back to their motherland as well. And so France and Spain, one conquering Vietnam, the other conquering Latin America, have a similar history in the same way that our people have a similar history. But it's never really taught like that because there's so many similarities. As Latin Americans, we overcame feudalism. Unfortunately, capitalism has had such a strong hold in Latin America with U.S. imperialism especially. And so I wanted to get into you mentioned Ho Chi Minh. And I find Ho Chi Minh really fascinating because his history is one that a lot of us as communists have gone through, where he started off more as a nationalist, right, to my understanding, and then he became an internationalist, and he traveled around the world, and he was born, interestingly enough, I believe in the 1890s, and in Latin America at the time period, there was a lot of other revolutionaries who were doing similar work that Ho Chi Minh was doing. For example, in Peru, there was an indigenous communist named Jose Carlos Mariátegui who was a contemporary of Ho Chi Minh and had very similar critiques of the Western left, the white Western left, that ignored the struggles of colonized peoples. And that's what I find beautiful about Ho Chi Minh, is that in his travels through France and through a lot of countries, he was able to rediscover his love for his people and become an internationalist in a way that helped his people. And so walk us through, who is Ho Chi Minh, how important is he for the Vietnamese people, and what lessons does Ho Chi Minh have for building socialism in any revolutionary movement?
Yeah, so I can give you, yeah, you said like everything you said about Ho Chi Minh was right. And then I'll just give you a summary of Ho Chi Minh's life. So he was born in 1980 under the king term. Actually, his father worked for the king. And then when he retired, he went back to the village and became a teacher. So that's why Ho Chi Minh was raised and born like in like Confucianism of China. And then when he like the first time when he was 13-year old, that was when he read a book written by France. And then it talked about like freedom and equalization, okay, stuff like that. And he struggled himself and like, what were that meaning? What those word means? And then why it's so different here in Vietnam? Why didn't we have freedom? Why are we not equal to the other people in the world? So because of France, they took our freedom, they took our equalization, and then but like the words they said in the book is so beautiful like that. And then he's been struggle about that himself since he was 13. And then when he was 21, he decided to go out of our country because like he tried to seek to help our country, but like there's nothing interdomestic situation that he can have. So that's why he decided to go out and see what's going on in the world and to find a way to save our country. So like when he was 21, we went to the UK, the US, France, or many other countries in Latin America and Europe too. And then finally, 5 years later, he read Leninism, one of the articles written by Lenin. And then after that, he read Marxism. And then he immediately know that communism and socialism is the only way that can help our country. That's the only way to help us fight back the imperialism and colonialism. And Vietnamese workers have to fight along with the international workers in the world too. So like based on that core ideology, Ho Chi Minh like build a plan for us. So like based on the communism and socialism, he got a plan like, and this is a lesson. Maybe it could be a lesson for you too if you want to consider that. Like you have to Marxism and Leninism, they are good, they are right, but they mostly talk about international stuff, and mostly like Lenin mostly talk about the situation in USA, the Russia at that time. Sorry. So like Ho Chi Minh, he modified it, and he literally like he made the version of Marxism and Leninism that fit the situation in Vietnam at that time. So like that's a thing that you might consider, like we cannot use a 100% exactly accurate like the same of Marxism and Leninism into the situation in your countries right now. You can't. You have to change it. You have to modify it to fit the conditions in your countries. And then Ho Chi Minh also and his team also like find the weaknesses of the Vietnam society at that time and find the strong point and try to fix the weaknesses and strengthen the strong point. And that's how we win actually. Because like we got the version of Marxism and Leninism for ourselves, and then we know that what we're good at and we know what we're bad at, so we can.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And I think that's the correct Marxist approach is that people view, unfortunately, within, especially in the West, people view Marxism in a sort of religious way where it's like memorizing what Marx said in 1858 about like some random German philosopher, where Ho Chi Minh understood that Marxism Leninism is a tool that you, just like you said, you mold it and you adapt it to the conditions of your area. And he successfully did that in Vietnam, incorporating elements of traditional indigenous Vietnamese culture into Marxism and using popular art and culture to explain Marxism, which I think is a beautiful thing. And in Latin America and Cuba, there's been similar examples of that. In Venezuela right now, which is technically not a communist party led country, but it's a socialist government that is moving toward building socialism. They've also adapted socialism to Venezuela's conditions. Me, myself, personally, I'm an atheist, but in Latin America, Catholicism is very popular. A lot of people are religious, they're Catholic, but they also consider themselves socialist. And so what we see in like Venezuela, for example, is someone like Hugo Chavez using the Bible to explain class struggle and capitalism. And very similarly in Nicaragua with the Sandinistas, during the Sandinista revolution in the 70s, a lot of priests became guerrillas. And also in Colombia, you have the case of Camilo Torres, who was a priest and was a founder of the National Liberation Army. And I think any great revolutionary understands that, just like Ho Chi Minh understood. You have to mold and adapt socialism to the conditions of your country. And I think he did that very successfully in Vietnam. And so I wanted to ask you, how has, obviously we know during the 60s and 70s, there was the campaign of war against U.S. imperialism. What was Vietnam like after the U.S. troops went home? Right. What was that process like in terms of rebuilding? And also, what has Vietnam been like after 1991, after the fall of the Soviet Union, which drastically changed socialism in the global stage? How has Vietnam adapted its socialism throughout those time periods?
Yeah, okay. So we gained our independence against the USA in 1975. And I just read a newspaper, no, an article. I just read an article written by an American woman that decided to stay in Saigon in 1975. And this is what she said. A few days before the fall of Saigon happened, um, like the propagandas and newspapers in the south of Vietnam back then like spread like information and news about like if the communist soldiers came to Vietnam, they would just kill everybody that wanna bloodshed and bloodbath and everybody. So that's why thousands of Vietnamese people try to run away because they scared those propaganda. And like that woman, that American woman was only one of the 9 American people who decided to stay, because like she wanted to witness it. She was scared, of course, but she wanted to be witnesses. But like, and the fact is, there was nothing like mass murderer or like bloodshed or bloodbath. There's nothing. And like she said, like, here's the thing. She said, like, on like one day after we came and took over the puppet government in the South of Vietnam, we immediately work on rebuilding everything, like rebuilding like houses and like education system, and then like encourage people to do farming and open back up all the business in the street. So that's what we did it. Like we did it as fast as possible. There's no time to waste back then. And like mostly after 1975, we mostly like rebuild the places that were destroyed in the world. And then we had a lot of like, what do you call chemistry dealing soil or something, because like I told you, they sprayed a lot and tons of toxic in Vietnam. And after they left, they also left like thousands of barrels of toxic in the jungle of Vietnam that haven't used yet. So like we had like our soldiers had to form like special teams, a big team to deal with those first, because like farmers needed safe land to farm to feed us. So, and then we rebuild our education system, infrastructure. And I want to tell you about this. This is one of our biggest mistakes until now, I guess. Because like when we won the war, 1975, even though Ho Chi Minh said that we need to build a socialist country slowly, he had a plan for it. But when we won the war, Ho Chi Minh died. And then the government back then, they were too arrogant and too innocent, naive, I guess. That like, okay, we just won the war and then we can do everything now. So they immediately build a communist society when there's no currency, like where it's like no, like, it's like, it's so hard to explain it. It's like my mom lived through that time for 10 years. So like there was no salary, there was no money, and everybody to gather together and work together, and they will receive like the stamps every month, and she will bring those stamps to the national grocery store and exchange for goods. And that's like, we tried to do that in 10 years and it didn't work. No, it's not because like it's a wrong, like it's not because it was the wrong goal. It's because like we didn't have enough material to build that communist society, and we were so naive to do it. Because like based on what Ho Chi Minh, Marx, and Lenin said, communism is very materialist. Means that you have to have a society which have strong economy already, like very good infrastructure, and then from that you will strive toward communism. But Vietnam, we get we did it wrong, because like we were destroyed. We had nothing. We had like zero economy and zero infrastructure, zero educational system, but we still did it. So that's why we failed. So then in 1986, we realized that was wrong. And then we re-examine everything again, and then follow Ho Chi Minh's words again, when like we try to open our economy and then try to let capitalism in, blah, blah, something that I explained everything in my video actually. And we actually that time we still had a lot of hope, because the USSR still there and then help us, right? But wow, 5 years later, 1991, USSR collapsed. We were freaking left alone, and we still had like strong embargoes on us, setting by the USA, really strong. So it took us 3 years to negotiate and then desperately ask the USA to lift the embargoes. And finally, in 1994, they kind of lift the embargoes on us. That's why we are still rebuilding our country now. Actually, 45 years after the war, we are still rebuilding our country. It's not finished yet. We are still have to deal with a lot of like veterans who had like cancer because of the toxic, or like children born with disability, mental illness. And then still like there are still a lot of, like in Hanoi, actually, in Hanoi, the capital of Vietnam, A lot of lakes came from bomb. It was like they bomb us, and those bomb lakes become the lake. So that's why there are a lot of lakes in Hanoi, and we're still reviewing that. And yeah, um, so that's the thing. Like, it's we still fighting the war now. We're still fighting the war actually because fighting the war with capitalism when they force us to put more and more and more capitalism in Vietnam. And they actually, you know what? They hate our socialist programs. They are trying their best to make us remove those programs, but like we still say, "Fuck you!" No, that's it. So yeah, uh, as far as I know, the reason why Vietnam let capitalism in, and this is the reason why a lot of people are criticizing Vietnam for that. Because like, oh my God, you fought so hard and then you want to be socialism, communism, but why did they let capitalism in, huh? And I told them like, hey, we let capitalism in not just because we freaking suddenly realized that capitalism is superior to communism. No, it was not. No, it's nothing like that. We let capitalism in as a tool to help us to build our economy and our infrastructure and education system. And then after that, when we are socialist enough, we can just remove that tool easily. So that's the reason
Yeah,
why we let capitalism in.
that's a great point because here in the West, in the US, a lot of people are politically immature, especially a lot of anarchists or people who want to seem like they're these true revolutionaries. I'm pure revolutionary. And those people will critique countries like Vietnam for allowing a small market sector to come in because obviously, like you mentioned, Vietnam needs to rebuild from years of devastation, literally poisoning, invasions, colonization. And part of the revolution is building infrastructure, building up the wealth of society. And socialism can't be built on poverty, it has to be built on wealth. And part of that is having to maneuver through the capitalist, imperialist economic system and building the means of production before they can be redistributed. And unfortunately, me as a communist, that's one of the struggles that I have living in the United States is talking to people about why I support Vietnam, why I support the People's Republic of China, Cuba, and other workers' states that are moving towards socialism, building socialism, because they don't understand that you don't get a magic wand once you are in a revolution. It's not like you can be like, okay, starting now, we're going to have skyscrapers and do this. You have to build that, and you have to maneuver within the global capitalist economy. And so I'm so glad you mentioned that because it's something that a lot of people who are politically immature, they're only attracted to the violent side, right? They're only attracted to like the guns and being in the jungle and being like a guerrilla, which is part of it. That's definitely part of it, and it's something that we take pride in. We take pride in revolutionary self-defense, serving the people, defending the people. But the most important part of socialism, of a socialist revolution, is building the means of production, serving people, giving people high quality education, healthcare, and sometimes that means having to compromise with local capitalists in order to build the infrastructure. And I think that's the right approach because that's something that's being lost by a lot of young people. And we see this cycle over and over again where you have like revolutionary movements in the global south that rise, but then people in the west are like, oh well, they have a McDonald's, so they're not really socialists and we're not going to support them. And it just blows my mind. And actually in Cuba there was something similar and because after the Cuban Revolution, it was from 1959 until today. But obviously, in 1991, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Cuba entered what it's called a special period, where it was no longer able to rely on the Soviet Union for help, and so it had to open its economy up to foreign businesses in order to survive. And that was just something they had to do. There wasn't any other way around it. And I imagine, as you mentioned, Vietnam had to do something similar. Now that we've kind of touched base on the economics of Vietnamese socialism and how it relates to Latin America, tell us about the Vietnamese political system. Obviously, we know the Communist Party of Vietnam is the leading party in the country. How do people participate in Vietnamese politics, and how do workers exercise their power in your country?
Okay, so that's one thing I want to criticize about Vietnam political system is that it's very hierarchical. So like it works like that, like from the village scale, like me and my mom will vote for the village leaders, and then there's a team of committee or something like that, and then that team will vote for the district level. The district level will vote for the city level. The city level will vote for like the national level. And that's it. It's very hierarchical. So like Vietnamese people, we don't like vote directly for our president. We don't, because like for step on step like that, it's very hierarchical, and then I don't really like that. But like actually Da Nang, we are working on it. Da Nang is gonna be the very first city in Vietnam who like people can vote directly for the mayor of the city, and that's very wow, like wow, good. So because usually like people like me, we only can vote for the district level, and then the district level we vote for the mayor. But like now we can vote directly for the mayor. That's something new, and and this here's a funny thing too. I want to mention. Saying that a lot of people, a lot of countries, people in the West criticize Vietnam that, oh my God, it's authoritarian. Oh, see, they only have one party to rule the whole country, blah, blah, blah. So here's the thing. Uh, in Vietnam, we have one party, but actually, if you watch my video about how our National Assembly works, it feels like there's no party at all because nobody argue about ideology anymore. Nobody argue about that's democratic or Republican anymore. When they mention about a problem, they talk about that problem only, and this person like didn't agree with that person about this problem, but on the other problem they might work like differently. So like it feels like there's no party. And we also have members of like non-party members in the National Assembly. So it's not like pure one-party system. Actually, our non-party members in our National Assembly is way higher than the numbers of the third parties in the USA. Really, I checked that. And then what else? So like in the USA, like theoretically, you have two parties, like two main parties, like Republican and Democratic Party, right? But like it's the illusion of choices because both of them are freaking capitalist. What's the difference?
It's like McDonald's or Burger King.
Yeah. You have a two choice. Good. You have two choices, huh? They are both freaking capitalists, and then they just take turn to take the power, and that's it. And in Vietnam, we have one party, but actually it feels like there's no party because nobody argue about what party are you in, and then the the concept of what party that person is doesn't accept doesn't affect what we are discussing about that problem at all. We focus on the problems only. And talking about the power of workers in Vietnam, actually the workers in Vietnam have really strong power. Here's a report that I just read a few days ago. In 2018, the whole Vietnam, we had 214 worker strikes. The scale is from 100 to 8,000. And like it means like nearly every 2 days we had one worker strike in Vietnam. And the police there, actually the police in Vietnam, because they have the right to strike unless they commit any violence or something. So like when there's the worker strike in Vietnam, the police just came there and sit there and watch, and that's it because they freaking have the right to strike, and nobody's gonna argue about that. And you know what? 80% of the strikes happen in the big international corporations in Vietnam. So, so like yeah, it's very strong. And then they just like I remember when like 8,000 people in my hometown, 8,000 workers strike because they didn't have a parking lot with a roof on it. They didn't have a parking lot with roof, so like it can ruin their motorbikes or bicycle, right? So they strike. And then until the company built the parking lot with the roof on it, done. And then they can strike if like the food in the company is not good. They strike. They like require better food, and that's it. So it's very strong. And then the class consciousness in Vietnam is also strong because for decades now, we've been like educating people about Marxism, Leninism, Ho Chi Minh thought, and class consciousness since like we were 6 years old until we were 21, graduated from university. They were like they are the essential subjects for all students in Vietnam. Like if you want to graduate from university or colleges, you have to pass Marxism class, Leninism class, and Ho Chi Minh thought class. Very boring. Yes, it's super boring, but but like so based on that, we build our class consciousness. So like we might after that we might forget about it, but when struggle came, we will remember everything back and did it. So like strikes in Vietnam, worker strikes in Vietnam, anything something so normal, and it's so like it can happen every day that we don't even talk about it a lot anymore. It's normal.
Yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful. And in Latin America, it's a lot of countries, it's the complete opposite right now. If you get caught reading a book by Marx or Lenin in a lot of countries, the police will take you away and will kill you or will torture you. And if you're, yeah, in Latin America, in places like Honduras, in Colombia, and the Dominican Republic, in Peru, in places with right wing governments that are extremely pro US, if police catch you with books by revolutionaries like Marx or Lenin or others, they'll detain you and they'll arrest you. And every single day, communist and socialist leaders in Latin America and the Caribbean are killed by right wing paramilitary death squads that are hired by companies to break up strikes. So, in a lot of Latin American and Caribbean countries, strikes are not allowed. If you do strike, if you do organize any protest, you're going to be hunted down. And in the case, for example, where my family's from, Honduras, you have a famous environmentalist named Berta Cáceres. She was an indigenous woman who was protesting the construction of a dam in her area, a foreign multinational dam. And she was a labor activist, indigenous, and she was killed for her activism. And in a lot of countries across the region, people every day are killed because of their activism. So to see the contrast is just so it's sad because Vietnam and Latin America have so much history together, solidarity, even though they're literally a world apart. There's so many connections, there's so many similarities, overcoming feudalism, U.S. imperialism, European colonialism, and yet we see the path that Vietnam is taking right now of progress and development, albeit not perfect, like you said, but much better than the situation that Latin America is in now, where if you're socialist or communist, you get killed for organizing a protest, and so it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm so sad too. I'm so sad too because like as I'm working on like recently I'm working so hard on like the anti-propaganda against Vietnam. So like because like the capitalist propaganda now all over the world, especially in the Western countries, working so hard to debunk Vietnam and spread fake news and disinformation about Vietnam. The reason why is that I think is the reason why is that like Vietnam is now an evidence, especially after this pandemic. Vietnam is a bright evidence proving that socialism works. It's not perfect, but it works, and it's better than capitalist system. That's why they are working so hard on spread fake news and wrong news about Vietnam. So like we successfully contained the virus, even though we were one of the very first country in the world to get the virus, and then we located right next to USA with to China with the long border with China. We had the first case and came from China, and then like we have less than 400 cases. And more than 50% of them just came directly from the outside of the country, not the inside, because we contained it so well. Zero death. And like I saw a lot of newspapers said like, oh, Vietnam first they said that we were lying, that we were like hiding the death and the cases and that, and now they cannot do that anymore because it's obviously wrong. Now they said that like they explain like, oh, Vietnam seceded because it was authoritarian like oppression and then repression. Like what the fuck, man? Like
It's the racism, and it's like arrogance too, because people in the West, like especially white people in the United States and Europe, like they're so used to being number one, They're so used to being the best at everything. They're like, they have to be lying. They're authoritarian. They have to be lying about their success. And it's like, no, yeah, nobody has died from COVID. They're feeding their people. They're doing a better job than the United States, which has like 20 times the wealth. And it's just it's a slap in the face. And I think it's something that as Latin American people we take inspiration from Vietnam. And I know right now in the Caribbean, for example, Vietnam has been working a lot with Cuba to on mutual relations, building up industry. Vietnam has also signed a lot of accords with Nicaragua, with Venezuela, and also in Bolivia under Evo Morales. Unfortunately, he was removed in a right wing fascist coup recently last year. He was also collaborating with Vietnam, and so what do give me a sense of what do Vietnamese people what conceptions do they have about Latin America? I'm really curious. Like, what conceptions do people in Vietnam have about Latin America and Latin American countries and socialist experiments that have taken place there, especially like Cuba?
Okay, so here's the thing. We Vietnamese people actually we don't know much about what's going on in Latin American countries. Actually, we don't know much about it. We know that like you have like live in like uh actually yeah, that's a sad thing about that. So we don't know much about what's going on over there. But when we think back about the time in the 60s and the 70s when we were still fighting the USA, a lot of us like got a lot of love for people in Latin America countries, like because you help us a lot, and like it still brings me tear whenever I think about this because, like, the people you help us a lot. You send us money, even not much, but that was something. You send us medicine and like gifts to Ho Chi Minh and gifts to our people. Like I remember that, like they sent us a guitar as a gift, like to show the love of Latinos.
Guitarra, yeah.
Yeah, a guitar, yes, and then foods and then weapons and especially medicine. We was like it was heartwarming whenever I thought about that because at that time we were struggling and then we were so poor and we were destroyed, but people like in the world still helping us, and then that was like it helped our spirit a lot, strengthened our spirit a lot to fight because this is the right fight and we are fighting for something right, and people in the world understand that and they support us. Especially when you talk about Cuba, Vietnamese people, we don't consider Cuba just our friends. We consider Cuba our blood brother because, like, Cuba was the very first country in the world who officially set a relationship with Vietnam when we gained independence in after 1945 or something like that. Cuba was the very first country who recognized Vietnam as an independent country. And like in the 60s and 70s, both of our countries were so poor. But you know what? Cuba, but at that time, they were so poor too. And this is how they help us. They sold sugar to the world and then they send all the money to us to help us. It's like they spend even the last penny on us. So like, oh my God, I always want to cry whenever I think about like how much you did for us in the 60s and 70s. So like in the 80s and 90s, so sadly that we could not work more because we both under the embargoes of the USA strongly. They stopped like when we were located so far from each other, like the other side of the earth. So that's why it's so hard for us to work together. But when both the country got like the embargoes on us got lifted, so like for example in this pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, this is how Vietnam and Cuba works together. Vietnam we made our own COVID-19 test kits, right? And it's like 100% accurate, and the price just 1/4 of the price of the test kit that made by capitalist country. We make like 1 month, we make that test kits, and then 1/4 of the price, 100% accurate. That's how socialism works, okay? And then so we gave the technology to Cuba. Like we didn't just give Cuba the test kits, we gave them the technology to make the test kits. And then Cuba gave us the formula of the vaccine that they invented before. So like we exchanged the knowledge. and the technologies work together. That's how we work. There's no money, there's no profit in it. It's just purely to help each other. And one more funny thing is a few years ago, Vietnam is one of the biggest country who export rice to Cuba, right? So like a few years ago, when we sold rice to Cuba, some of our leaders just sold it like with the normal price as we selling rice to the world. But like not long after that, a higher leader in the Communist Party, he found out about that and then he criticized those lists a lot. And then they gave the Cuba special discounts for rice. And then for years, importing our rice, Cuba like owed us a lot of money because they could not afford it right away, right? So like, you know what? That leader also erased all the debt. Like, just take the rice and then that's how the relationship of Vietnam and Cuba. Of course, I wish like there's going to be more. But at least there's something that we still love each other, still working on each other. And then like you can ask randomly any Vietnamese who live in Vietnam what they think about Cuba. They always show the pure love to Cuban people.
That's so heartwarming to hear and beautiful. And international solidarity is something that's amazing and unites people who have a common enemy, which is imperialism, capitalism, which has devastated all of our countries. The same way Monsanto bombed and devastated your country, it has also been responsible for so many countless deaths in Latin America and the Caribbean. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, there's so many references and admiration for Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh, especially. For example, two examples I want to point out. In El Salvador, in a country in Central America, with a big guerrilla movement in the 80s, there was a man named Cayetano Carpio, and he was a commander of the FMLN, a national liberation movement in El Salvador, a communist guerrilla movement. And his nickname was the Ho Chi Minh of Latin America because he studied Ho Chi Minh very seriously. He got all of Ho Chi Minh's books translated to Spanish and was able to apply a lot of the prolonged People's War strategies from Vietnam in El Salvador, because there was also a jungle based area, and a lot of those tactics were very successful there. And also in Venezuela, there's an artist named Ali Primera, who's also in the Communist Party of Venezuela. He's one of Latin America's most famous musical artists from the left, and he has a song about Ho Chi Minh that's really beautiful, and about Vietnam and how inspirational it is that the people have been able to get on their feet and fight back, and so the references are there, and I hope that this conversation can be part of a broader interconnection between the people of Vietnam and Latin America. And we have a comrade actually in Anticonquista, Nicholas Ayala, shout out to Nick, who was in Vietnam a few years ago, and he got a chance to visit all of the sites. And he said it was a very beautiful experience, and he brought back a lot of photos. We actually have an article on our website, if you want to check it out at some point, of his pictures in Vietnam that chronicles the war. Yeah, and it's beautiful, and it connects what happened in Vietnam with all of the struggles in Latin America. And so with that said, what message do you have, Luna, for Latinos and people in Latin America and the Caribbean who want to learn more about Vietnam? Where can they start? Obviously, your YouTube channel is a tremendous resource for learning about Vietnam, but what are some other good resources for our people to learn about what's going on in Vietnam?
Actually, that's the big question, and it's very hard to answer because like the propaganda against Vietnam now is still so strong, and like there are not a lot of Vietnamese people who speak out like me because like mostly they don't speak English or something like that, and it's really difficult actually. So like you have you can check out my channel. That's the best thing. And then try to my advice to you to you Latino Americans, like try to educate yourself. That's very important. Try to read more, and whenever you see any like propagandas, articles about Vietnam, about socialism, please like stop for a moment and think about it. Is that true or not? Like try to deprogram yourself is very important. And I keep fighting because it's hard. it's tough, it's difficult, but you have to keep fighting because you're not fighting for your lifetime only. You're fighting for your future, for your children too, and it's important. So like Vietnamese people, we've been fighting China for 1,000 years, and then France for 100 years, and then USA colonialism for like 25 years. It's hard and it's tough, I know, but like you have to keep the faith, keep fighting, because if you don't do it, your children, your next generation is gonna live in the same condition like this. And yeah, and like about the resources about Vietnam that's trustworthy, you can check out Vietnamnet. It's the official Vietnamese newspaper that they have English version of it. Vietnamnet and a lot of the Saigon News, Vietnamnet. Try to not like, please don't trust everything like CNN or the Fox News or talk about Vietnam, BBC, oh my gosh, and Reuters, Human Rights Watch. Mostly all the non like government like NGO pages, they are all capitalist based, and then just don't trust them, please. Try to find like the local news such as Vietnam News, Saigonese, my YouTube channel. I will try my best to offer you the truth about Vietnam. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
Cool. Well, on that note, Luna, thank you so much. We spoke with Luna Oi, who's a YouTuber based in Hanoi, Vietnam, who creates content about Vietnam and Vietnamese socialism. And we just had a great discussion about how we can learn from Vietnamese socialists and communists and apply those same methods to Latin America and the Caribbean, adapting them to our conditions and being successful in our fight against capitalism and imperialism. Luna, thank you so much. And please, everybody who's watching and listening, subscribe to Luna Oi on YouTube. Just type in Luna Oi and her channel will come up. And by the way, one last thing, Luna, me and my girlfriend, Ophelia, we live here in Los Angeles in California, and our favorite food, hands down, is Vietnamese food. We love Vietnamese food.
Yay!
We get it like every week. So I just wanted to mention that. I love Vietnamese food, and I hope to go someday soon. But thanks again, Luna. Take care and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye bye. So nice to talk to you. Bye bye. Love you all.